Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast. As promised last week, this is the second and final part of this mini series on managing hunger during a fat loss diet. Thanks for tuning in again, and let's dive into it. Now, the final category I want to touch upon is food choices. And within this category, my number one strategy is to keep your diet somewhat samey. Because the less you think about food, the smoother your fat loss phase is going to be. If you're constantly thinking, oh, what could I make? What exotic recipe could I prepare? That is going to keep your focus on the food, which is going to increase your likelihood of experiencing a distressing amount of hunger. So don't waste hours every single day or every single week trying to come up with a new menu. Now, I am not suggesting to eat chicken, rice, and broccoli 3 times a day until you're done with the diet, because you still want to have a varied dietary pattern to support your body by covering all of your nutritional bases. What I'm suggesting is the following. First, I'm going to use as an example somebody who eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and maybe 1 or 2 snacks. I'm not suggesting that this is the perfect meal pattern to have. It's simply an example. So in this situation, what I am suggesting is for this person to choose 1 to 3 options for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and 1 to 3 options for their snacks. These should be meals that fit within their calorie targets and their macronutrient targets, meals that they enjoy and that they find easy to make and realistic to make based on how busy they are. And an example of a meal could be a stir fry. Another example could be porridge with some toppings. And a third example could be a jacket potato with a side of protein. So these aren't specific recipes. They are somewhat generic meals so that you can actually change the individual ingredients. So while the meals stay the same, so you're always going to have, let's say, porridge and toppings for breakfast, you're always going to have a stir fry for lunch, and you're always going to have a jacket potato with a side of protein for dinner, you are going to be able to vary the individual ingredients and rotate through various ingredients at a frequency that works for you. Let's use a weekly frequency as an example. 1 week you could make stir fry with tofu, and you could top your porridge with peanut butter and protein powder. And then with your jacket potato, you could have canned tuna. And then the following week, you might top your porridge with Greek yogurt and berries. You could make your stir fry with beef, and you could have beans and cheese on your jacket potato for dinner. So these would enable you to still have a very dietary pattern, but the meal structure is always going to be the same, so that you don't have to spend too much time playing macro Tetris on your calorie tracking app or trying to come up with super exotic recipes every day. You have your meal structure. All you do is vary 1 or 2 ingredients every week or at whatever frequency you prefer to keep yourself interested, to keep the diet varied, and to cover as many nutritional bases as possible. The second strategy is to use 2 factors to your advantage, and these are energy density and food volume. Energy density is a term that refers to the calories contained within a certain weight of food. When you're comparing two different food items that contain the same amount of calories, the food item with the lower energy density is going to look bigger. So in a larger, heavier portion of that food, you're going to have the same amount of calories contained in a smaller, lighter portion of the other food. A very, very easy example to use for this is visualize a tablespoon of peanut butter. That tablespoon, a non-heaped, so a level tablespoon of peanut butter, contains roughly 90 calories. Visualize the size of that tablespoon. It's not very big, is it? Now picture 300 grams of strawberries. 300 grams, if you're not in Europe, is 0.6 of a pound. Okay, it's over half a pound of strawberries. That amount of strawberries also contains 90 calories. This means that strawberries have a lower energy density than peanut butter. Now, which one is going to fill you up more? A small army of strawberries or a tablespoon of peanut butter? I know, right? So if you harness energy density to your advantage during a fat loss diet, that means that you are aiming to eat lower energy density foods, so you can have bigger portions which contain the same calories as smaller portions of foods with a higher energy density. This hunger management strategy is known as volume eating. And it's usually more satisfying psychologically because I don't know about you, but I really like to see a big plate, especially when I'm in a calorie deficit. And it's also more filling from a physiological perspective because as food fills up your stomach, it's going to activate what are known as tension and stretch receptors in the stomach. And the job of these receptors is to send fullness signals to the brain, so that you stop eating before your stomach becomes excessively stretched. So if you're eating these lower energy density foods, that time when the receptors are going to send that signal to the brain, hey, we're full now, stop eating, is going to come a lot sooner. So you are a lot less likely to overconsume calories. Now you can Google low energy density foods, but in general, these tend to have at least one of these characteristics. They tend to contain more water naturally. For example, berries or cucumber have a very low energy density. Or they absorb water when you cook them. And this is food like rice, pasta, soup, or stew. The reason why these foods have a lower energy density is that water has no calories. So if a food is, let's say, 60% water, only 40% of it is going to contain calories, which makes it lower in energy density. And the second characteristic is that foods lower in energy density also can have a naturally higher fiber content and a naturally lower fat content. And the reason why this particular combination of nutrients results in lower energy density foods is that fiber contains only 2 to 3 calories per gram. So a food that's higher in fiber and lower in other macronutrients is going to have a lower caloric content, whereas fat contains 9 calories per gram. That's 3 times as many calories as 1 gram of fiber that you can find in 1 gram of fat. So clearly, that makes a food that's high in fat potentially 3 times higher in calories than a food that's high in fiber. Now, eating low energy density foods can be so powerful that I've had several clients tell me once they start really applying this strategy that they cannot eat up to the calorie target I've assigned them in a fat loss diet because they feel so full, which in a fat loss phase, when you're trying to lose body fat, in my opinion, that's really not a bad problem to have, to feel that satiated. To wrap up this part, I also want to make a note on the potential value of cycling through foods that are higher and lower in energy density and introduce more lower energy density foods when you need them. The reason is that you're not going to be hungry on day one of a fat loss diet, 5 minutes after the beginning of the diet. But you may become hungrier and hungrier once you hit week 4 or week 6 or week 8. It depends on the person. The point is, if on day one you're already having really low energy foods with every single meal, you're having massive salads, the biggest bowls of porridge in existence, the largest, you're having cauldrons of soup, you're getting used to those meals really, really early in the process. So when it comes time that you actually need them to manage your hunger, you've been so used to having them that they don't have as much of a powerful effect. So my recommendation would be to start a diet and adopt enough healthful foods to cover your nutritional basis for fruit and vegetables and lean protein, whole grains and healthy fats. And then as the diet becomes progressively more difficult, then you start dropping in more and more lower energy density foods and you start making food swaps. For example, at the beginning of the diet, your fruit of choice could be banana, which is relatively high in calories as far as fruit goes. But then maybe after 8 weeks of dieting, you're having, instead of 3 bananas per day like you were doing in the beginning, because you really love bananas in this example. Pass me the funny example, come on. So instead of having 3 bananas, now you start having 2 bananas and a bowl of strawberries. And then you start having 1 banana and a bowl of strawberries and a bowl of raspberries. And if you're really, really struggling at the end of the diet, you're having watermelon, berries, and strawberries. So basically, you're not pulling all of the stops from day one, but you are introducing these foods when needed. Strategy number 3 is to swap high-calorie ingredients in meals that you already make and enjoy before the diet starts for lower-calorie ingredients. This is such a simple but also underrated way to manage your hunger levels without overhauling your entire diet, which often makes the whole process of dieting less sustainable and realistic anyway. If you think that you're going to have to completely change everything you've always done up until now. It may actually work for some people. I'm not saying it's not a viable strategy. For some people, hitting the reset button is fantastic. For other people, it's simply not realistic. So if that's the case for you, you don't need to overhaul your diet. It's only one strategy that you can use. Another is to make simpler swaps. It could be as easy as, if you're now having a tuna sandwich with high fat mayo or full fat mayo, you switch to low fat mayo. So instead of consuming 100 calories from mayo, now you're consuming 50. And that's already 50 calories that you're saving in a day. And if you repeat that for all of the meals and snacks that you're having, and you also introduce more fruit and vegetables, and you swap higher fat protein sources for lower fat protein sources, then you're going to end up with a diet that's very similar to what you were already eating. So you like all of the food that you're eating, but it's simply low enough in calories to help with fat loss. And I just want to make a quick note to say that when I make examples where I say that you could replace full fat food with lower fat food, I'm not trying to demonize fat, and you do need some fat in your diet to maintain general health. However, fat does have the highest amount of calories per portion. So as I said, it's 9 calories per gram. So when making examples, it's just easy to make examples using full fat versus lower fat versions. But I am not trying to recommend that you should never eat fat or that fat is bad in a fat loss diet or in a diet in general. And with that caveat in mind, I'm going to move on to strategy number 4, which is to base your meals around lean protein and fiber. because there's plenty of evidence to show that these two are two of the most satiating nutrients. Now, there's a caveat. Some of you, dear listeners, may already be pretty advanced in your physique development endeavors, so you may already be eating a high amount of protein and a high amount of fiber. And if that's the case, then don't expect that increasing your protein and fiber further is going to have as much of a satiating benefit as if somebody else was starting with a really low protein intake and or a really low fiber intake and was aiming to push that up to higher levels. It seems like, unfortunately, the law of diminishing returns works in this regard as well, whereby the lower your protein and fiber intake, the greater the benefits that you'll get hunger management wise by increasing these, up to a point where when your intake is adequate or even higher than adequate, then those benefits reduce until they basically disappear. So that's just something to be aware of. Other than protein and fiber, another resource that you can use to make food choices that are going to keep you more satiating is called the satiety index list, which is a list of 38 different foods that the subjects involved in a 1995 study rated from most satiating to least satiating. The results seemed to show that in general, wholemeal products and whole grains were perceived to be, on balance, more satiating than white flour products. Among high protein options, fish was considered the most satiating. As for fruit, apples and oranges came out on top. With regards to starchy carbs, boiled potatoes didn't only dominate the category, but they also won the Ultimate Satiety Award as the most satiating of all of these 38 foods. And finally, among snacks, popcorn seemed to be the most satiating. You can look up the satiety index list on Google, and all of these foods were compared to white bread. So essentially, the subjects were asked, compared to a slice of white bread, how filling is this particular food? Now, as always, an important caveat is that science is based on averages and you're an individual. So what might be really filling for the average population studied in that particular paper might not be as filling for you. But if you ask me, most of us are average humans anyway, so these foods are certainly worth a try. And my final hunger management strategy, not only for the category of food choices, but for today, is to limit, if not avoid, liquid calories. There are several studies that have shown an association between calorific beverages and a higher caloric intake. What that means is that when subjects have calorific beverages in their diet, they also seem to consume more calories during the day. Now, while I want to appreciate that association isn't the same as causation, it is also true that other research has shown that liquid food is generally less filling than solid food. So it stands to reason that the calorific beverages that these participants were consuming in these studies probably didn't help said participants feel full, and therefore likely contributed to them eating a caloric surplus. And aside from science, once again, simply think about your own experience. If you were to eat an apple or to drink a glass of apple juice, which one would keep you more satiated for longer? It would be the apple, most likely. A particularly dangerous, so to speak, type of beverage during a fat loss diet is alcohol. For one, it contains 7 calories per gram or per milliliter, so it does contain a reasonable amount of calories, somewhere in between carbs and fats, where carbs contain 4 calories per gram, fats contain 9, and alcohol contains 7. It also doesn't make you feel satiated. It actually dehydrates you, which then could contribute to you feeling more peckish. It also increases often cravings and lowers your inhibitions, which means you are definitely not going to make decisions that are in line with your fat loss goals if there's also party food wherever you're drinking is alcohol. I'm not necessarily suggesting you have to completely cut out beverages. For example, you could include 0-calorie Coke or other soda in your diet. I'm only recommending that if you're struggling with hunger and you want to manage it better, cutting down on the amount of calorific beverages that you drink so that you have more calories for other solid, more filling food is likely going to be a winning strategy. To put a bow on the episode, I want to clarify that even if you were to use every single strategy that I've mentioned in this episode, you need to appreciate that hunger is a natural consequence of a fat loss diet. So ultimately, you will need to accept that, especially if you diet for a long period of time and or you lose a considerable amount of body fat, you are going to experience hunger at some point, and it may become a challenge. However, hopefully, if you follow the advice I've given you in this episode, you're going to be able to face that challenge and to complete your diet successfully. I wish you the best of luck with your fat loss endeavors. Thank you very much for listening. As always, all of my links are in the show notes. I look forward to talking to you again, and until next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.